The next morning, Leah expected Ji-woon to lock her away again, to tighten his grip after catching her trying to escape. Instead, he surprised her. "You're coming with me tonight," he announced, sliding a sleek black dress across her bed. The fabric shimmered like liquid midnight, daring her to step into his world. Leah frowned, her fingers brushing the silk. "Where?" He buttoned the cuffs of his suit, his movements sharp, deliberate. "A meeting. My enemies think they can test me. They need to see you by my side." His eyes flicked to her, dark and unyielding. "They need to see that you're untouchable." Her heart stuttered. "Ji-woon, you're making me a target." He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand gripping her chin firmly but not cruelly. His voice was low, a mixture of command and obsession. "No, I'm making you my queen." Hours later, Leah stood at the edge of the grand dining hall, her body draped in the black dress that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her wig was styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless, her beauty undeniable. Yet inside, her stomach twisted with nerves. The room was filled with men, powerful, dangerous men with sharp suits and sharper eyes. They fell silent when Ji-woon entered, Leah at his side. Ji-woon's hand rested at the small of her back, possessive, protective. He guided her to a long table where his lieutenants and rival bosses waited. "She's real," one of the men muttered in Korean, his gaze lingering too long on Leah. Another smirked. "So this is the woman who has the devil wrapped around her finger." Leah stiffened, but Ji-woon didn't flinch. He pulled out a chair for her at the head of the table, his chair before taking the seat beside her. The message was clear. She wasn't his guest. She was his equal. The meeting began, tension thick as smoke. Men discussed territories, shipments, betrayals. Leah tried to stay still, her hands folded in her lap, though her pulse raced with every pair of eyes that landed on her. Halfway through, one of the rival bosses leaned forward, his smile venomous. "Pretty thing, isn't she? But pretty things don't last long in our world. A bullet doesn't care about beauty." Leah's chest tightened. Ji-woon's hand slid over hers under the table, squeezing gently, a silent command not to react. Then his voice cut through the room, calm but lethal. "The next man who even hints at touching her dies where he sits." The silence that followed was suffocating. Leah swallowed hard, her heart caught between fear and something dangerously close to pride. When the meeting ended, Ji-woon led her out into the night air. Seoul glittered beyond the glass doors, but Leah barely saw it. Her hands were still trembling. "Why did you bring me there?" she demanded, spinning on him the moment they were alone. "Do you enjoy parading me in front of men who want to kill me?" Ji-woon's jaw tightened. "I brought you because hiding you doesn't protect you. They already know you exist. If they see you're mine, they'll think twice before trying." Leah shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "Or they'll see me as the easiest way to destroy you." He stepped closer, his hands gripping her arms firmly. His eyes burned into hers, raw and unguarded. "Leah, don't you understand? You're not just some woman I stole. You're the only reason I haven't drowned in this darkness. If they want to come for you, they'll have to come through me. And I will burn this city to the ground before I let them win." Her breath hitched. His words terrified her. They thrilled her. They broke her. "You're insane," she whispered, her lips trembling. He lowered his head until his lips brushed hers, his voice husky. "Insane for you." The kiss that followed was searing, desperate. Leah clung to him, her tears mixing with the taste of his mouth. Every touch was a contradiction. Chains and freedom, love and madness, danger and safety. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "You're mine, Leah. Not for 180 days. Forever." Her heart stopped. The chains had never felt heavier, or sweeter. The silence in the penthouse felt different that night. Not the kind of silence that came from fear or anger, but one that hummed with unspoken tension. Leah sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, her long legs folded neatly, her eyes fixed on the city lights. Seoul glittered beneath her, but the beauty outside didn't compare to the storm building inside her chest. For weeks she had fought it, the pull she felt toward him. For weeks, she had reminded herself that Ji-woon was her captor, a ruthless mafia boss who had stolen her freedom. But the way he had looked at her earlier, his hand brushing her cheek with a tenderness that didn't match the hardness of his world, it had left her weak. "Why do you keep staring at me like that?" she asked softly, her voice carrying across the room. Ji-woon was leaning against the bar, his shirt half unbuttoned, tattoos peeking through like shadows on his skin. A glass of whiskey glowed amber in his hand, but he hadn't taken a sip. His eyes, sharp, dark, possessive, were locked on her. "Because I can't believe you're real," he answered, his voice low, husky. "Every time I think I have control, you walk into the room and I lose it." Leah's breath caught. His words, raw and unpolished, slipped past her defenses. For a man who ruled with blood and violence, Ji-woon was disarming her with something far more dangerous: vulnerability. "You sound like someone who wants to be loved," she teased gently, though her heart was racing. He chuckled, dark and bitter. "Love is not for men like me." Then his expression hardened, as if he had revealed too much. But Leah stood, her silk robe brushing the floor as she walked toward him. Every step she took seemed to tighten the air between them. When she finally reached him, she took the glass from his hand and set it on the bar. "Maybe love doesn't care who you are," she whispered. His eyes burned into hers, searching, questioning, aching. And then, like a dam breaking, Ji-woon pulled her into his arms. His mouth crashed onto hers, hot and desperate. Leah gasped against his lips, her hands instinctively gripping his shoulders. This kiss wasn't gentle. It was fire unrestrained, the kind of kiss that left no space for reason. Ji-woon kissed her like a man starved, like someone who had waited his whole life for this moment. Leah felt herself melting, her body betraying her fear as she responded with equal hunger. "Leah," he groaned against her lips, her name sounding like both a prayer and a curse. His hands slid into her hair, pulling her closer, as if he feared she might vanish if he let go. She had sworn she would never give in, that she would never feel this way for him. But as he lifted her onto the bar, his lips trailing down her neck, her resolve crumbled. His touch was dangerous, but it also felt like the only thing that had ever been real. "You're mine," he whispered against her skin. "For these 180 days and after. Do you hear me? Mine." Leah's heart thundered. She wanted to resist, to remind him she was still his prisoner. But her voice betrayed her, soft and shaky. "Then make me believe it." What followed was not just passion but surrender, hers and his. The ruthless mafia boss who ruled with iron and fear was gone in that moment. In his place was a man, broken and desperate, holding on to the only woman who had ever made him feel alive. Time blurred. The city outside continued to shine, but inside, it was only them, lost in each other, tangled in heat, in emotions too raw to deny. When at last the frenzy slowed, Leah lay curled against him, her cheek resting on his chest. His heartbeat was steady but strong, like a drum anchoring her in a world that had begun to spin too fast. "You're not what I expected," she admitted quietly. "And you?" Ji-woon replied, pressing a kiss into her hair. "Are everything I never knew, I needed." For a fleeting moment it felt safe, as if the world outside didn't exist, as if love could truly grow in the shadow of violence. But safety in Ji-woon's world was always an illusion. The shrill buzz of his phone shattered the peace. He stiffened, his arm tightening around Leah before he reached for it. His voice turned sharp, all tenderness gone. "What?" he barked in Korean. His jaw clenched as he listened, and Leah could feel the tension flooding his body. When he hung up, his eyes were darker than she had ever seen them. "What is it?" she asked, sitting up, fear prickling at her skin. He hesitated, as if debating whether to tell her. Then, with a sigh, he brushed her cheek. "Someone followed us. They know about you now." Leah's blood ran cold. "Who?" "My enemies," he said simply. "And they don't just want me, Leah. They'll want to use you." The fragile warmth of their intimacy evaporated, replaced by a chilling reality. For the first time, Leah understood the full danger of loving a man like Ji-woon. And for the first time, Ji-woon realized he had something to lose, something his enemies would kill to take from him. The city never truly slept. Seoul's neon glow bled into the penthouse as Leah stood at the window, clutching her silk robe tight around her body. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, lips swollen from his kiss, eyes still hazy from what they had shared. Yet beyond that soft glow of intimacy, a shadow of fear had crept into her heart. Ji-woon's phone call still echoed in her mind. "They know about you now." She turned, watching him pace across the room like a caged beast. His shirt was still open, but all traces of vulnerability were gone. This was no longer the man who had whispered against her skin. This was the Mafia king, his jaw clenched, his tattoos flexing as his fists curled. "Ji-woon," she called softly. He stopped. His eyes met hers, sharp, unreadable, but burning with something deeper than anger. He strode toward her, cupping her face in his hands. "You're not safe here anymore," he said, his voice low but urgent. "From now on, you don't leave my sight. Not even for a second." Leah swallowed. "But, no buts," he cut her off. "They'll use you to break me, and I won't let that happen." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened her. Instead, her chest ached with something dangerous, trust. She searched his eyes, looking for cracks, but all she found was a fierce determination that made her pulse race. "Do you really care that much?" she whispered. Ji-woon's thumb brushed her lips, lingering as if the answer was carved into her mouth. "You're the first thing I've ever cared about, Leah, and I'll burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you." Her heart skipped, torn between fear and something intoxicating. She wanted to tell him she didn't want to be his weakness, that she hadn't asked for this chaos. But instead, the words slipped out before she could stop them. "Then don't let go." Ji-woon's eyes darkened with hunger. Not just desire, but devotion. He pulled her into him, his lips crashing onto hers. This kiss wasn't wild like before. It was deeper, heavier, a vow carved into her soul. Their bodies pressed together, and for a moment, Leah forgot the danger outside. All she could feel was his heat, his hands gripping her waist as if anchoring her to him. When his mouth trailed down her neck, she gasped, fingers curling into his shirt. "Say it," he murmured against her skin. "Say you're mine." Her body trembled, torn between resistance and surrender. But the truth was already spilling from her lips. "I'm yours." The words lit something inside him. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the bedroom with a hunger that matched the storm inside her. She knew it was reckless, falling for a man who had kidnapped her, giving her heart to someone who lived in shadows. But in that moment, reason dissolved. What followed was fire. Not just passion, but an unspoken promise that neither of them could deny anymore. Ji-woon wasn't just taking her body. He was claiming her soul. And terrifyingly, she was letting him. When the night finally stilled, Leah lay tangled in his sheets, her breath uneven. Ji-woon sat at the edge of the bed, his gun resting on the nightstand within reach. His hand brushed her hair gently, a tenderness that didn't fit the weapon at his side. "You've changed me," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. Leah stirred, her voice soft. "And you've trapped me." He smirked, but there was no cruelty in it. "Maybe, but if it means keeping you alive, I'll never apologize." Before Leah could reply, the sound of glass shattering pierced the air. Both of them froze. Ji-woon was on his feet instantly, gun in hand. His eyes flashed with lethal focus as he motioned for her to stay low. The tender man from minutes ago vanished, replaced by the ruthless predator she had always known him to be. Leah's pulse hammered as footsteps echoed from the hallway. Shadows moved against the flicker of city lights, and the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked filled the silence. "Stay behind me," Ji-woon hissed, positioning himself between her and the danger. The bedroom door creaked open. A masked figure stepped inside, weapon raised. Ji-woon didn't hesitate. The sharp crack of his gun split the air, and the intruder dropped instantly. But before the body even hit the floor, more footsteps thundered through the penthouse. They weren't here for Ji-woon. They were here for her. Leah's scream caught in her throat as two more men burst into the room. Ji-woon fired again, but there were too many. The walls shook with violence, the taste of blood and gunpowder flooding the air. And in the chaos, one of the masked men lunged, seizing Leah by the arm. Ji-woon roared, his gun swinging toward them. But the intruder pressed a blade to Leah's throat, halting him in his tracks. "Drop it," the man growled. Ji-woon's chest heaved, fury blazing in his eyes. His finger twitched on the trigger, every muscle straining. For the first time, Leah saw something she had never imagined on his face. Fear. Not for himself. For her. The blade pressed cold against Leah's neck, its sharp edge kissing her skin. Her body froze, every breath trapped in her chest. She dared not move, dared not blink. The masked man's grip was iron, his voice low and venomous. One more step and she dies. Ji-woon stood just a few feet away, his gun still aimed at the intruder's head. But for the first time, his hands weren't steady. His heart pounded so violently Leah thought it might echo across the room. "Put the gun down," the man growled. Every muscle in Ji-woon's body screamed to resist. He wasn't the kind of man who surrendered, not to enemies, not to fate. But then his eyes met Leah's. White, frightened, trembling. And in that instant, the unthinkable happened. Ji-woon lowered his gun. The weapon clattered against the marble floor, echoing like a death sentence. The intruder smirked beneath his mask, dragging Leah backward toward the door. Ji-woon took a step forward, but the knife pressed harder against her throat. "Don't follow," the man hissed, "or she'll bleed before you can blink." Ji-woon's fists clenched, fury surging through his veins. He could kill them all with one hand. He could paint the walls with their blood. But Leah was the one thing he couldn't risk. He stayed frozen as they pulled her out of the bedroom. Her terrified eyes locked on his until the door slammed shut. For a moment, silence. And then Ji-woon shattered. With a roar, he kicked the nightstand across the room, sending glass and wood flying. His chest heaved as rage consumed him. But beneath the fire was something far more dangerous. Fear. The Mafia king, feared across Seoul, had finally been brought to his knees. Not by bullets, not by betrayal, but by love. Leah's world spun as she was dragged through the corridors of the penthouse. Her captors moved fast, brutal, their hands like steel around her arms. Panic clawed at her chest, but deep inside, one thought kept repeating. Ji-woon won't let them take me. He can't. When they shoved her into a waiting black van, the night air bit against her skin. The city lights blurred as the doors slammed shut, and for the first time since she had landed in Korea, Leah felt true helplessness. But even through her fear, she whispered to herself, "He'll come." Meanwhile, Ji-woon was already in motion. The moment Leah was taken, his men flooded the penthouse. Blood stained the floors where intruders had fallen. But Ji-woon didn't pause. His orders cut through the chaos like knives. Lock down every street within 10 blocks. I want cameras hacked, every car tracked. Find her now, boss. One of his lieutenants began cautiously. This could be a trap. They're baiting you. Ji-woon's fist slammed into the wall, cracking the plaster. His voice thundered. I don't care if it's a trap. If she bleeds, I'll burn this entire city and everyone in it. The men fell silent. They had seen Ji-woon angry before. They had seen him ruthless. But this was different. This was a man possessed. Inside the van, Leah fought to steady her breath. The two men across from her kept their guns trained on her, their masks hiding everything but their cold eyes. You think he'll save you? One sneered in broken English. Leah didn't answer. She lifted her chin, forcing courage into her voice. He'll kill you all. The man laughed, a sound as sharp as broken glass. Maybe, but not before we make him bleed. Her stomach twisted, but she clung to one truth. Ji-woon would not stop. Not for anything. Not for anyone. Back at the penthouse, Ji-woon loaded a fresh magazine into his gun, his face set in stone. He had spent years building his empire. He had fought, killed, and ruled without mercy. But tonight, none of it mattered. There was only Leah. He glanced at the city sprawled before him, his kingdom, his battlefield. Then he muttered under his breath, a vow only the night could hear. They took what's mine. Now I'll take everything from them. With that, he stepped into the shadows, his men falling in behind him. The hunt had begun. The streets of Seoul had never looked more alive, and more deadly. Neon signs flickered above as Ji-woon's convoy of black cars cut through the night, engines growling like predators on the hunt. Inside the lead vehicle, Ji-woon sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the glowing city ahead. His gun rested across his lap, but it wasn't the weapon that terrified his men. It was the storm in his eyes. He had always been ruthless, but tonight he was something else entirely. Tonight he was a man in love, and that made him far more dangerous. "Boss," his lieutenant said carefully. "We tracked the van. They're headed toward the docks, probably planning to put her on a boat." Ji-woon's jaw tightened. The docks, neutral ground for gangs, but also a graveyard for anyone who crossed the wrong line. He knew what that meant. Leah's life had an expiration date, and the clock was already ticking. "Faster," he ordered, his voice like steel. "If they get her out of the city, she's gone." The driver pressed harder on the gas. Inside the van, Leah's wrists burned against the ropes that bound her. Every bump in the road sent her heart lurching, but her mind was clear. She wasn't just a victim. She was Ji-woon's weakness, and these men knew it. The one with the knife leaned closer, his breath hot and foul. "You don't understand, pretty girl. You're not special. You're just bait." Leah met his gaze, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "If I'm not special, then why is your boss so afraid of me?" For a second, his smirk faltered. She held onto that small victory, though her hands trembled in her lap. She whispered to herself, He'll come for me." At the docks, shadows moved like restless ghosts. Men in dark coats patrolled the edges, their guns catching the moonlight. The van screeched to a halt, and Leah was yanked out, her feet scraping against the rough ground. The air smelled of salt and rust, of secrets buried beneath the waves. The men shoved her toward an old warehouse, its broken windows glowing faintly from within. Inside, the air was damp and heavy, echoing with dripping water and the scuff of boots. A tall figure emerged from the shadows, their leader. His mask was gone, revealing a scar that split across his cheek like lightning. His eyes locked on Leah, and a smile tugged at his lips. "So this is the woman who tamed the devil," he said in Korean, his voice like gravel. The great Ji-woon, brought to his knees by a model in silk wigs. Leah stiffened. She didn't understand all of his words, but she understood his tone. Mocking, cruel. The man crouched, gripping her chin harshly. "We'll see how long his empire lasts when it's built on something so fragile." Leah jerked her head away, her voice cutting like glass. "You'll regret this. He's coming for me." The scarred man laughed, standing tall. "Oh, I'm counting on it." Outside, tires screeched against the gravel. Ji-woon's cars had arrived. He stepped out of the lead vehicle, his black coat billowing behind him like a shadow. His men fanned out, weapons drawn, but Ji-woon didn't wait. His gun was already in his hand as he stormed toward the warehouse. Inside, the scarred man smirked when the doors burst open. Right on time, gunfire erupted instantly, echoing like thunder. Ji-woon moved with lethal precision, every shot clean, every movement sharp. His men followed, but it was clear, Ji-woon wasn't here for a war. He was here for Leah. Through the chaos, Leah saw him. Their eyes met across the warehouse, his blazing with fury and desperation, hers wide with relief. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. But before Ji-woon could reach her, the scarred man yanked her back, pressing his knife against her throat again. "Drop it!" he shouted over the gunfire. "Or she dies." Ji-woon froze. The entire warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Slowly, he lowered his gun, his eyes never leaving Leah's. But this time, there was no fear in them, only promise. "I told you," Ji-woon said in Korean, his voice low and deadly. "If you touch her, I'll make sure you beg for death." The scarred man sneered, dragging Leah backward. Big words for a man who's lost everything. Leah's heart pounded. She could feel Ji-woon's fury vibrating through the air. But she also knew the truth. this was far from over. The knife pressed deeper into Leah's skin, a thin line of cold fire that made her throat tighten. The scarred man's grip was unyielding as he dragged her backward, his sneer twisting in satisfaction. Around them, Ji-woon's men stood frozen, guns raised but unable to fire. The warehouse smelled of gunpowder and blood. Bodies of fallen enemies sprawled across the floor. But in the middle of it all, time seemed to stop. Ji-woon standing just a few feet away, his gun lowered, his eyes burning like a storm. "You're not untouchable anymore," the scarred man taunted. "Your empire means nothing when a woman controls your every move." Leah flinched, but Ji-woon didn't blink. His voice was calm, almost eerily so. "If you hurt her, you'll never leave this place alive." The scarred man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I don't plan on leaving. Not without her blood on my hands." The blade pressed harder and Leah gasped. Ji-woon's jaw clenched, fury rippling through his veins. But he didn't move. His gun remained lowered, his body rigid. Then, to everyone's shock, Leah spoke. Her voice trembled, but her words cut through the air like steel. "Do it," she said. The scarred man froze. Ji-woon's eyes widened, fury flashing like lightning. "Leah!" She lifted her chin, staring directly into her captor's eyes. "Kill me if you want, but know this, it won't break him. It will only make him destroy you faster." For the first time, the scarred man hesitated. His grip wavered, just slightly, but it was enough. Ji-woon saw it, the crack in his armor. In a blur, Ji-woon moved. One shot rang out, clean and merciless. The scarred man jerked, his eyes wide in shock as blood blossomed across his chest. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. Leah stumbled forward, but Ji-woon caught her instantly, pulling her into his chest. His arms wrapped around her so tightly she could barely breathe, his heart hammering against her cheek. "You could have died," he growled, his voice breaking between rage and relief. "Don't you ever do that again." Leah trembled in his arms, but she tilted her head up, her eyes glossy. "And if I hadn't, you'd still be standing there, giving him the power." His breath caught. For a moment, Ji-woon stared at her, as if seeing her anew. Not as his captive, not as his weakness, but as his equal. Strong, brave, unyielding. "I told you not to make me fall for you," he muttered, his voice rough. Then, before she could reply, his lips crashed onto hers. The kiss was fierce, desperate, claiming. Leah melted against him, her arms clutching his shoulders as if he were the only thing keeping her upright. Around them, the warehouse faded, the guns, the blood, the danger. It was just them, burning in the middle of chaos. When they finally pulled apart, Ji-woon rested his forehead against hers. "You're mine, Leah, even if it kills me." Her lips trembled, her whisper barely audible. "Then don't die." But the night wasn't over. As Ji-woon guided her out of the warehouse, his men securing the perimeter, one of his lieutenants rushed forward. "Boss, we found something." Ji-woon's eyes narrowed. "What?" The man held up a blood-stained envelope, pulled from the scarred leader's coat. Ji-woon snatched it, ripping it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, with a name written in bold letters. A rival clan, the ones who had ordered Leah's capture. Ji-woon's fists tightened around the note, the veins in his arms pulsing. Leah looked up at him, fear swirling in her chest. She had seen his rage before, but this was different. This was war. He slipped the paper into his pocket and pulled her closer. His voice was low, but it sent chills down her spine. "They wanted to take you from me," he whispered. "Now I'll take everything from them." Leah's breath hitched. She clung to him, torn between fear and something she could no longer deny. Because as much as she hated his world, as much as she wanted to escape, part of her wanted to stay. Part of her wanted him. The night air outside the warehouse was heavy with smoke and blood. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but Ji-woon didn't flinch. His men moved quickly, erasing every trace of the battle, dragging bodies into waiting trucks, scrubbing the ground as if the massacre had never happened. But Leah knew. She had seen everything, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line she could never step back from. Ji-woon kept her close, his arm firmly around her waist as if daring the world to try again. His voice was low, clipped, the voice of a man who had just buried his mercy. "Take her to the safe house," he ordered one of his lieutenants. "No one touches her. No one speaks to her. She stays under guard until I return." Leah stiffened, pulling slightly away. "Until you return? Where are you going?" His eyes met hers, sharp as steel but laced with something softer that he would never admit in front of his men. "To end this." Her chest tightened. "End this how?" Ji-woon's jaw tightened, his silence answering for him. He didn't need to say it. "War. Blood. Retribution." "No," Leah whispered, shaking her head. "You can't just." He leaned down suddenly, his lips brushing against her ear, his words like fire on her skin. "They tried to take you from me. Do you understand, Leah? That's not something I forgive." Her breath hitched, her hands trembling against his chest. His heart was pounding, not just with rage, but with something darker. Devotion twisted with obsession. "I don't want you to forgive them," she said, her voice breaking. "I just don't want you to lose yourself." For a moment his mask cracked. His eyes softened, his hand lifting to cup her cheek. "I lost myself the moment I met you," he admitted, his tone raw. "Now there's no turning back." Before she could reply, his men pulled up with sleek black cars, headlights slicing through the darkness. Ji-woon guided her into the back seat, his hand lingering on hers a second too long. "I'll come back to you," he said, almost like a vow. "No matter what it takes." Then the door shut, and the car pulled away, leaving her staring at him through the tinted glass as he turned to his men, barking orders like a king readying for battle. The safe house was nothing like she expected. Minimalist, silent, guarded by men with stone faces and sharp eyes. Leah sat on the edge of the bed, hugging herself as her mind spun. She thought about his kiss, his hands shaking when he held her. About the way he looked at her as if she was both his salvation and his destruction. She had told herself she hated him, that she wanted nothing but freedom. But now, with the echo of his touch still burning on her skin, she wasn't so sure anymore. What if freedom meant losing him? Her chest ached at the thought. Meanwhile, across the city, Ji-woon stood at the head of a long table. His lieutenants gathered around him. Maps of Seoul were spread before them, marked with red circles, rival territories, hideouts, smuggling routes. "They thought Leah was my weakness," Ji-woon said, his voice cold and cutting. "But they made a mistake. She's my reason." The men exchanged glances. Some nodded, others looked uneasy. Ji-woon leaned forward, his hand slamming down on the table. "From tonight, no negotiations. No mercy. We take their businesses, their families, their lives. Everything they love. Burn it to the ground." The room erupted into agreement, fists pounding the table, voices rising in loyalty. War drums, beating in the dark. But as Ji-woon lit his cigar, his thoughts weren't on his enemies. They were on Leah, her trembling voice, her defiance, the way she had stood against death itself and refused to break. He exhaled smoke slowly, his eyes narrowing. "She doesn't know it yet," he murmured, almost to himself. "But she's the only thing keeping me alive." Back at the safe house, Leah sat by the window, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. She didn't hear the door open, but she felt it, the shift in the air. One of Ji-woon's guards stepped inside, his face unreadable. "Miss Leah," he said quietly, "you should be careful who you trust in this house." Her blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The guard hesitated, then leaned closer. "Not all of us serve him. Some serve the ones who want you gone." Leah's eyes widened. A chill swept through her body. The war wasn't just outside. It was already here.
Hello besties, stay tuned for episode 3. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe and share.